This is our next panel on business model innovation, and it's actually a new panel that we added this year from requests, because in healthcare there's a lot of different ways to make money even on the same product, and a lot of different ways to move your product forward. And so before we start, I want to introduce our panel. I actually have our panelists both introduce themselves, both Lucy and Jens. Should we start with Lucy?
Sure. Hello everyone, I'm Lucy Biddeth. I'm a partner in McKinsey's New York office. There I work with biopharmaceutical companies of all sizes, really, from my smallest client has 3 employees to ones that have over 100,000 employees. I also do quite a bit of work with academic medical centers as well. In terms of my background, I have a PhD in organic chemistry, and I also did a postdoc in chemical biology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center.
I'm Jens Eckstein. I'm the president of SR1. I'm a chemist by training as well.
Best discipline, right?
So I went through a lot of the journey that you guys trying to start into. I spent 10 years in 2 startup companies in biotech, then switched to the dark side and now in investing for 12 years. I'm also a Kaufman Fellow, and that's why entrepreneurship is very close to my heart. And I try to find any way I can find to help young entrepreneurs to succeed, at least to start.
Okay, so what we're going to discuss today were various different types of business models, virtual businesses, fully integrated in some platform plays, as well as, time permitting. Hopefully there will be plenty of time permitting to also talk about some different types of exit strategies, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A, of course, and take some questions from the audience. But so let's actually start with fully integrated companies, which is kind of your classical model of a healthcare company. And let's turn it over to Lucy to describe what is a fully integrated healthcare company, and what are some pros and cons of that approach to building your business.
Sure. So fully integrated companies, let's take it as an example, a traditional pharmaceutical company, but the same would be true for a med device company, digital company. There's really 3 pillars to the business. There's the R&D arm, which stands for research and development, which is where the discovery and development of what you're going to ultimately commercialize resides. You have a second arm, which would be your commercial operations, and this is where the ideas for how to sell your product, right, the marketing will be taking place. And then there's the manufacturing component, right, the actual fabrication of the product or solution that you're going to be taking to your customers. Those would basically be the 3 main pillars of a traditional company. Of course, there would be a series of what we call the back office functions that support the operations of such an organization. And that's where you're going to see your typical functions like HR, finance, procurement. So as you may imagine, we think about all these components coming together, it just sounds really heavy. So what does that mean? It tends to be very capital intensive when we think about what's required to make something like that happen. Most companies will start, frankly, by being an R&D shop in a way, right? And ultimately you have a product that you're ready to commercialize. You add then the commercial and manufacturing arms to that enterprise. Because you tend to have such infrastructure, you tend to be able to be more independent in the kinds of things that you're able to do. And but if you have the resources to do it, it may be a very attractive way to operate. One of the things we'll be discussing during this panel is that these days you have more and more companies that in a way offer the services so that you don't have to own all of these components. And so we'll talk through how you can go from the traditional fully integrated model where the organization owns each of these pillars to ones where we ultimately go to the other end of the spectrum and have a virtual company. Yes.
So it's a good segue, what is a virtual company, and what are some of the opportunities and challenges?
So times have changed tremendously, because I remember when I started in the 90s, we actually still had FICO as a concept for a biotech company. That pretty much has gone away. You have very few companies in healthcare that start as a fully integrated company. So you can have the total opposite of that, and that's really a total virtual company where you pretty much have a management team. You don't have any labs, you don't really have any brick or mortar, and everything you do, you're doing with CROs, with contract research organization, or some other outside experts. And I think the great news is that over the last 20 years, the environment has changed dramatically. You have very, very sophisticated contract research organizations. You can almost do anything you want. Chemical synthesis, biological stuff, animal experiments, IP,
Software development.
Software development, HR, payroll, all this stuff can be outsourced. What you need then, of course, is a team that actually is very good at managing outside relations. And that can be a challenge because if you think about, very, very heavy R&D where, the conversation and the tight interaction between scientists is very important, and most of the science team is actually not in the building. You really have to have people who are very good in organizing and managing that. That looks very great in the beginning, but it can be really challenging. That was especially true when the whole world of contract research for some of the basic R&D functions was starting out in China and India. So you suddenly had your lab in India, so you had to deal with time differences for one. And also, the time you spend in just managing these relationships can be very challenging. So if you plan to do something like this, make sure you have someone who has done it before and really, really understand what it means in your timelines. So that can be a big challenge. If it's done well, it can be extremely efficient and it can be really fast. Whether it's much cheaper, that has changed as well. In the beginning, it was very, very cheap. But I think the more the quality and the qualification of the people in CROs has gone up, in order for those organizations to retain the quality and to retain the good people, their prices had to go up as well. So I think I would actually recommend really for the quality component, I think you really have to do your homework if you outsource a part of your R&D organization, or any part of your organization for that matter, and make sure you get good references, that those people that you hire for some good money are really good people.
And so just to kind of summarize some of the opportunities, that means it's much less capital intensive up front. You don't have to buy core facilities, animal facilities, any of that. You could just buy the animals from the CRO themselves. And let's say you're running out of cash, easier to dial down the services for the CRO than having to lay off a bunch of employees. And I know we've been quite pharma heavy, but this is very, very well known and a well path trodden in for digital companies as well. So not so much digital health, but especially in software, people have been outsourced in India for a very long time. There's several outsourcing firms even based in San Francisco where if you have no technical background, you just say, I want my app to do X. I want it to measure the patient's these sort of symptoms, or allow the user to input these sort of symptoms. They will then build it for you. You have to spec it out very clearly because they're not the product team, and they will build whatever you tell them to build. But it is, you do lose some of that back and forth, don't you, amongst that. And so what were some of the challenges actually for fully integrated? I think we spoke about, building that up. So it was quite capital intensive.
Yeah, because you can imagine you have so many different groups in the organization. Aligning everyone around a common strategy can be really hard. And in these days, no matter how much money you have, any organization is going to say they're resource constrained, right? So who's going to get the extra dollar? Is it going to go into R&D? Is it going to go into commercial? And even within commercial, are we going to put our money behind selling more product in the US versus selling more product in the UK? So some of these alignment of the organization and developing that common culture, which you would think should be relatively easy to do, can be one of the things that takes the most time in a large organization. So decision making becomes really, really slow.
And I take it most of the founders, I've looked at most of your bios, are scientists, correct? You're not salesmen, you're not marketing experts. But when it comes to building a healthcare company, you will have a serious marketing team, won't you? Especially in pharma. I think of the top 10 pharma companies, Roche was the only one that spent more on R&D than marketing. Every single one spent more on marketing than R&D. And that's just a fact of life. They're not buying Google ads, of course. It's a different type of marketing that they're doing. And actually, just to segue very briefly to platform business models. And so, Jens, this is kind of cycled in and out in terms of popularity and how much the market is favoring platform plays. But I know from reading all of your business plans, there's several platform companies here at OneStart. And so, Jens, could you describe a bit around, what is a platform company? And secondly, the choice you have to make. Do you develop one of the products yourself, or do you remain a platform company, or could you do both?
Well, I think the definition of platform is also a pretty loose one. So you have to actually define what platform means. And I think in today's world, platform really means product platform. It has to be clear that your platform is the opportunity to have multiple products. If it's a platform that is a tool, then it's a tool company. So this is a big difference. I think when we are talking about platform company, we have, I think, about 30% of our portfolio probably what we call platform companies. These are product platforms, which means you develop a piece of biology, let's say, with all the assay technology around it, with the knowledge of pathways, the therapeutic applications, and you know that if you understand that whole biology, that's your platform, and out of that platform, you will have several product opportunities. Those are actually the best companies, I think, because in the long run, they create actually the most value if they're successful. And if you go over the last 20 years and you look at really successful biotech companies, I would say more than half of them are really platform companies or were platform companies. They are very successful. The problem is it's a pretty tough path because in the beginning you start out as the platform. So you're building the biology, so you don't really have the product yet. And nobody knows exactly how to value you because they don't have the product where you can do a DCF around it and you can figure out what the NPV is. So if you actually go out fundraising as a pure platform company and you don't really have any product idea, you usually have a very hard time. So that leads to business plans that you usually throw away after 2 years, which means you put something as your lead product in there because that's going to be the valuation you get in the beginning. And you're going through a very, very difficult time, let's say 2 years down the road, once you have really, industrialized your platform, you really are the master of that piece of biology, and you're starting now to really do product development on your first lead product. At this point, internally the company changes because you're changing really from a broad biology company to a product company. And allocating resources from that point on is a real challenge. There are very, very few companies who actually survive this hybrid stage if it's a long, long time. You have to be fairly quickly in either then really switching very quickly into a product development company where you build up your development expertise and the biology is kind of in the background, or you figure out a way to, through very creative partnering, to actually monetize some of the product ideas very, very early where you can keep the platform alive and you keep cranking out new programs. And that flow of programs actually gives you your revenue stream. Both of those things are not easy to do. These are pretty challenging business models, and there are very few companies that really have succeeded in doing this. But if you succeed, that's the best company in my opinion.
And why would you think it's so challenging? I mean, if you guys think about it, if you developed a piece of technology, your platform glycosylates antibodies in, a particular way, and that's valuable in healthcare or whatever. You have to, ideally your technology doesn't stay static, right? Other people are going to be trying to develop better technology, and that's why you have to have that focus on your platform as well. But the products you're going to make a lot of money, but it's hard to just bring a product forward as well. So it's going to take a huge amount of focus.
I think that the main problem is allocation of funds. So, you had 25 million to develop your broad biology platform. Now you're starting to go into a clinical development program. That's going to suck all the money, And whenever there's a decision, do we do this new killer experiment in the platform versus, hey, we have to enroll 10 more patients? It's pretty clear what you're going to do at that stage. You enroll those 10 more patients, and that tension really can break companies apart. And it also can lead to a point where companies are not focused anymore, and that's an issue as well.
So how do you kind of withstand that pressure from your investors or from a VC company, considering that, maybe potentially that I want to be one of those companies that sticks around for 50 years and actually, create something and build it and sustain it rather than sell it. So if I have someone who, owns a substantial share of the company and they're constantly pressuring me to sell out early, what is kind of a general strategy? I know it's going to be different depending on what you do, but what's a general strategy to try and keep that dream alive?
Under promise, over deliver helps. So I think if you can actually accelerate timelines, to actually get to market, that's huge, because once you have revenues, you're in a completely different game. Once you're in the revenue game, Wall Street can understand you. They put a multiple on you, and then whether you can use an IPO to actually get another growth financing done, and then you can grow the company. And once you're public, your investors, they can decide whether they're going to stick with you or whether they're going to sell at some point. So I think if you want to build a company, and that should be, you want to build a large company, I think IPO at some point is the logical step.
Hi, so we're talking about platform technologies quite a bit, and a lot of the companies in here are very early, and I've heard and consider myself doing some sort of contract research services for early revenue. Do you either have any insight on the best way to sort of execute those? What can you keep for yourself? What do you generally expect to see the pharma partner is gonna look for? I'm just trying to think of like more creative business models for early non-dilutive kind of partnerships. What have we seen? Thanks.
So I think in terms of what you keep in-house versus out-house, the main principle is whatever's most critical to the IP, right? You tend to keep in-house as much as you can. In terms of working effectively with your CROs, I think the key thing to keep in mind is that these CROs, they're working for everyone, right? Like the large scale ones. So no matter how much you want to think about IP protection, once it's out there, for example, the chemical methods that they're using for one company, they're going to be used for another company because they're under very high pressure to deliver to all their customers. So they're going to take advantage of whatever they have internally, unfortunately. I mean, if you're using it as a foundation basically to create the revenue stream that's going to allow you to basically feed into other things, absolutely. I mean, I've seen that happen. The key thing in terms of that platform, right, that it is, you have the proof of concept, right, in terms of like what you're using and that you are an attractive business offering, right, to who you're going out there for, right? I have certainly seen the model work.
Investors hate it. Just because, again, coming back to hybrid businesses, it's very, very hard to run hybrid businesses, and because you have to decide on a daily basis, where your focus is going to be and how you're going to use your funds. And again, if you really eventually want to branch into your own proprietary technology or a product, time is money. So every single time you make a decision, well, I'm going to put 50% of my funds into the CRO business or fee-for-service business to keep that going, and the other 50% in the development of my product, then you're losing 50% that you could have put into the product, maybe accelerated. So, there are very, very few examples that I know where it really worked out very well. I mean, you could figure out a way where you do it in stages, where, you run a fee-for-service business until you have 25 million in the bank, and then you do a full switch, and you go full steam product. Doing both things at the same time is very challenging.
Yeah, beyond just the capital, it's the focus, right? The management focus. If you're the service provider to a customer and something doesn't work out, the CEOs need to get involved to like fix something or do this and that when you should be developing the technology or hiring new staff for their main business line. And so it's hard to do, especially both at the same time. But I do see a lot of startups mention that, so it's a really great question because so many do mention that, not just in healthcare, to try to do like a side business to bring in non-dilutive money.
And maybe just one addition. There's also, I think, a fundamental difference between a good business and a venture type business. You can run a fee-for-service business and you're going to be happy for the rest of your life, because you have this little engine that chugs along, gives you, good revenues, good salary, and you're happy. And quite a few people are very happy with this. If it's a venture type business, I have to be able to at least dream about a 10x somewhere, where I can get tenfold my money back of my investment. And that is very hard in a pure fee-for-service business because there is no quantum leap in there. It's a ramp you're building, and unless that ramp has a miraculous quantum leap somewhere, it's not a venture business. So I think you will find if you have to raise money for that kind of business, it's a very different clientele and very different investors.
Yeah, Tillman Gerngross, you know him?
Yeah.
Yeah, at Dartmouth. So he sold his first company, Glycofy, for 400 million, I think, to Merck. And now he started Adimab, and they're not going to be like $1 billion company, but they distribute about $20 million a year back to their investors. They have about 50 million in revenue, and they're not trying to hit it out of the park, but they're an antibody fee-for-service company. He's got his own racetrack now, and you know, it's enough for him to make $20 million a year. And it's revenue generating, and he takes the profit and he just pays it back to himself and his investors in dividends every year.
Actually, his model is even smarter than this. So
he's a good guy to look up.
yeah. So I think over the last when came the LLCs, last 7 years. So over the last 7 years, you know, suddenly even venture backed companies have thought very much about the so-called LLC. So you don't incorporate as a C corp, but you incorporate as an LLC. LLCs allows you to actually feed revenues back to your investors at a very tax-efficient way, which you cannot do easily in a C corp. And Adimap is an LLC. So, and what you do is, you know, all the key IP and the service business is in the Adimap holding, but by now I think Adimap has spun out 4 or 5 companies using the Adimap technology platform, but for a very specific product. Yeah, those little companies, you know, if they sold for $1 billion, you know, that money flows back into the holding company and gives a very, very good return to investors. That's why Adimap is actually backed by venture investors, because they actually see that they're in that model, you can actually get those quantum leaps in returns. So that's a very interesting model. You should. I mean, everybody who has a platform should think about the LLC model and read up on the LLC model.
So I'm curious about how the impact of specific business models on the appeal that you have for acquisitions or for certain investors. So between, let's say, if you had fully integrated system versus something where you're outsourcing certain aspects of your company, I'm just wondering if you're outsourcing, let's say, like manufacturing somewhere else and you're doing a lot of the R&D in-house, if the companies could look at that and say, you know, now we have to start involving ourselves with someone else that's part of your business model when we'd rather bring that manufacturing in-house, but they don't know, like, will that detract from your potential? I'm just curious about how that works.
Yeah, no, so I would say actually it's probably even more attractive, because if you think that you're going to acquire another company, companies are looking for the synergies, right? And so most likely the larger company may have either the extra capacity to absorb it, or, you know, it's just much easier to integrate an organization the smaller that organization is. That said, right, like what you've seen in many, not many, but in some examples is when you're bringing in a new business, the best way to nurture is to leave it alone, right? And like the best example that you have these days in a way is like thinking about Genentech and, you know, what Roche did with Genentech, keeping it, you know, to the side, letting it grow. And so I think these days when you're looking at M&A, right, and I mean, M&A can be really big in scale, like you have 2 big pharma companies coming together, or it could be, you know, you're acquiring a smaller player. What the management team in the acquirer is going to be thinking through, right, it is like, what's the best fit in integrating that technology? Am I going to be using, for example, that new technology to advance what I'm doing internally? So we're talking about Glycofy, right? So when Merck acquired Glycofy, that basically came in full on in-house, right? And it was trying to see like to how many different programs can we apply this technology. Other models that you have, it is, you know, you're just acquiring assets, drugs, right? And so in that case, what's happening is the parent company is just, what is easiest then is to support the clinical development program and have their own manufacturing facilities take care of it. So as with most answers here, there's no one size fits all, right? But what I would just remind us is that it can be really attractive to an acquirer, that what you're acquiring is pretty flexible, because then you have many more choices around how you integrate into the main organization.
Any other questions? Okay, so we'll end in 1 second, but actually before we go, so Jens, you've seen a lot of entrepreneurs. What is the one piece of advice before we close up that you want to give? You want these entrepreneurs to leave the weekend with? I
mean, we frighten the hell out of you with all the stuff we're telling you about the reality. Don't let this hold you back. I mean, the only way, you know, to be successful is to try. So go and try.
What about you, Lucy?
Network. Test your ideas with as many people as possible. Be challenged even by folks that you don't think would understand what you're trying to do, because, I mean, frankly, those are the ones that you most, in a way, if you can convince them as well, can give you some really great way to move forward.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you so much. A round of applause for Jens and Lucy.